Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to be showing you how to make this cool slidey photo gallery using just HTML, CSS and jQuery. Okay, so like my other tutorials, it's going to be exactly the same. I'm going to start off with some necessities, which is just a style sheet, which is open here, and inside this I have some default properties, which is no margin, no list style, no padding or decoration on the text, because we would like to be in control of all those things later on. I've also linked jQuery hosted by Google, and that's just how we're going to make the slider work, how we're going to make this slideshow function. I often work with slide out navigation menus, so I tend to make a div with the class of page. All my content for the rest of the page will go inside this. So obviously, as you can see, nothing will happen yet. We haven't given any information. So create another div inside this div, and it's going to be called main container. You can call it whatever you want, but bear in mind we will be using this later to apply styles too. So if you call this something different, remember to reference that when you're styling it. So input it into here, and now the first thing that we should do is go to page, the whole page that we created, you know, the container for every piece of content we put in. And we're going to use the display property called flex, which is kind of a lesser known display property, but it is really kind of powerful, and I use it for centering things, so it's just an easy way for us to center this in the middle of the page. So set the width to 100% of the viewport width and the height to 100% of the viewport height. And then again, nothing will happen yet. But you see, if we make this background color red, that when we go to our browser, our background is red. But obviously we don't want this. That was just a test to make sure our style sheet was linked. Okay, so now we can start to style the main container. So you can set a width for yours. I'm going to set mine to 1000 pixels. Give it display of block, because that means it's now a block level element, so that we can center it using the margin 0 auto, which then basically says no margin on the top or bottom as represented by this 0, but automatically generate the margins for the left and right. And as we haven't said margin left 10 or margin right whatever, it's just saying, okay, get the container size, which is page, and that's 100%, and then it says, okay, we know that the width of our container is 1000 pixels, so what's the remainder? And then cut that in half and put half on the left, half on the right, and that'll perfectly center our image. So if we just give this a height of 20 pixels and then a background color of red so you can see it for a second, you see it's centered, not vertically but horizontally. And now we need to center it vertically, of course, so we can keep this background of red for now, just while we're working with it. And we use a display flex property called align self, which then will allow us to center it vertically. So if we say center, align self center, and we go to here, it will center. It's now centered horizontally due to the display block margin auto, and centered vertically using the align self property. But in actuality, we want our height to be a lot bigger than 20 pixels, and I went for 300, which was in the example you saw earlier, so that'll look like this. You could choose whatever you want. This isn't important at all to the process. It's kind of a specific thing, as is the width and the background color, which we can get. Let's keep it for now. Let's keep the background color for now. So the next thing we need to do is create something called a long container, and all this is let's create it and I'll show you what it does. So we say long container, and then go down a couple of lines and close it off, and you won't be able to see it, of course, but this is our container, so nothing outside the boundaries of this will be shown on the screen. But the long container is longer than this, but as it is too long, it just cut off over here and you can't see it. It'll just be white space as it is now, but it will exist behind there, which might not make a lot of sense now, but it will as I go on to explain it. So now we'll go on to create the items that go inside the long container, which is going to be our slides for our slideshow. And I've pre-made these just for the sake of time, but I'll explain to you now how it works. So we create a div with the class of item, and that just says it's an item of the slider, of the slideshow, and give it a unique ID, and that's because we're going to be applying a background image to it uniquely. So just set ID 1 through 9, because I have 9 slides. Of course, if you have 5, it'll be 1 through 5. Don't worry too much about this part, but remember to keep these in mind later when we're styling. So now if we go into our CSS, we can start to style the long container. So all we're going to give it now, we're going to say long container, and then we're going to set the height to 100%. We're not going to give it a width yet, because the width will be determined automatically by how many slides you have inside it. So I'll show you that later in jQuery. A lot of the widths are going to be dictated by jQuery. So now we can start to style the item. So we say item, and then give it a height of 100% of its container, which will make it fill its container. Float them all left so that all of the are side by side. So look, if we see it now, we'll be able to see anything. And now we're going to want to create the button that allows the users to have some functionality. So obviously they want to be able to press next and back. So you go to div class, create another div, and then call it C previous, which means it's the container of the arrow button to see the previous image. Close this off, and then inside here, create an image with the source. For me, it's just arrow.png because it's in the same directory as our working file right now. And then set the class to arrow previous. And now if we go to C previous in our CSS, we can say height. This is the container of the arrow. So this isn't the arrow image itself, don't get that confused. So say height of 100%, width of 50 pixels, and a background color of red. But also we want to position this absolutely, which means that it's a good thing we positioned our main container relatively to adhere to the position absolute property. We also need to set the display to flex. So say display flex again, because we want to center the arrow image inside of it. So display flex, and then we take a look now, and you see it fits inside, but obviously this is way too big. So give this a background color of green so we can see what we're working with right now. And you see this is only 50 pixels and the arrow is way out of line. So we called our arrow, let's close that real quick. We called our arrow previous because that's what it is. So let's go and style this. So we're going to say width 100%, and that's 100% of the C previous because that's its parent container and it's only 50 pixels. And then we also want to use the align self property again to say center. And now if we look at it now, you see it's centered inside this and it's the right width. I like to add a nice hover state, so we can do that now. This is just stylistic again. So this is C previous, which is the main parent container, and say background color when it's hovered goes to a dark, it's 0 RGBA, which is red, green, blue, and then alpha channel, which is the opacity. And this allows us to change the background color without affecting the opacity of the content inside it. So if you see this now, it's green and it goes to like a darker color. Obviously we want to get rid of this green and then give it a transition. So say transition all 0.4 seconds ease in out, and now we can work on this and see if we want it to be 0.4 or if that's too much. I think that's a little long, so we'll cut this in half and say 0.2 seconds, and it's like this. So this is perfect. And now we want to create the next button, of course. So this is going to have all the same properties as this. So we want to say C next. Now we need to just copy this and then copy this down a line, and then change C previous to C next, and arrow previous to, you guessed it, arrow next. And if we look at it now, it'll be totally wrong because we haven't assigned some of the properties. So let's go in and do that now. Okay, I've just realized that C next is actually the property that it is the parent container. So this wouldn't be rotated 180 degrees. So we get rid of this and then assign this a right of 0. So now we'll see, well, actually we won't see anything yet until we say arrow next, which is the arrow image, the image of the arrow that lets the user know that they can go right, you know, see the next image. And now we need to give this a transform of rotate. And then also on arrow previous, we need to also tag on the arrow next, which is the image, the arrow image. And now if we look at this, it's in the same thing for now, so that we need to fix that. So now we need to give this a left of auto, because as you can see up here, the left has been defined as 0 and also the right. So it's kind of conflicted as to what to do because it needs to be pinned to one side or another. So now if we refresh the page, you see how the arrow's over here now, which is exactly what we wanted to do. And now we get rid of this background green, and you see the hover state doesn't work, so let's fix that. So we'll hover here, C previous hover, add C next hover also, and now it works exactly the same. So I created a little bit of CSS earlier so that I didn't have to type it out in this video, and all it is 1, 2, 3 all the way up to 9, the IDs that we created that are here. And it says, okay, for all the background images, we want no repeat, all of them to be centered and it to cover the entire background. But it doesn't know what the images are yet. So now we need to say 1 through 9 and then say what we want the images to be. So again, I'll copy and paste that in for you so that you don't have to watch me do it. But say the background image URL is img1.jpg, and that's JPEG because it's a JPG image as opposed to JPG. So if we look at this now, you'll notice, oh it's gone. And what's the reason for that? Well, it's that these images that we've just created in here are all parents of the item class. And if you notice up here, the item class doesn't have a width, but if we give it a width of say 200 pixels, we'll be able to notice the images here, you see, all next to each other and weird and all that. And that's just reminding me that we need to say overflow hidden on the main container, and that then will just show this row of images. And now we can get started on the jQuery. Okay, so we need to open up a script tag and then declare document ready. So when the document is ready to run JavaScript and jQuery, run a function. And now we need to declare some variables. So you declare a variable in JavaScript and jQuery by saying var, var, short for variable. And I'm going to call it window width because that's what we want, the width of the window. So window underscore width equals window width. Another one we need to declare is the main width, which is the width of the main container. So say here, main container dot width. Again, as well, we need long container. So I like to keep a little bit of a neatness here. Let's push all these out and say long container is just, that's all we want. It's just a shorter way of typing it. And then variable item, which is going to be our individual items, our individual images on our slider. And that's just the item class, of course, again. And then a variable called slide number, which will be used later to tell our slider when to show and hide the arrows on the left and right. Because obviously if you can't go back anymore, the arrows shouldn't appear to let the user go back, because what's the point? It's just confusing, nothing will happen. So say slide number, and it's set to default as 0. So now we need to set the width of the long container, and the long container is the container inside the main container that isn't visible outside of the main container. So if this is the main container, the long container will go way outside this boundary and to the left, but we won't be able to see it because it's hidden. And then as we click the buttons, it will be dragged in and then will become visible. So let's set the width of the long container. So say long underscore container dot CSS and then width, and then set it to the main width times 3, is it, for example? Let's say 3.05, that's what worked last time for me. And then we need to set the width of the items. Well, this is important, this part. So you say item.css width is equal to the long container, which is this that we've just defined the width of, dot width. So the width of this divided by 9, because we have 9 slides. So we want to say, okay, each one will take up its own individual equal space in the long container. But as there's 9 slides, we divide the width by 9, and that's an equal space for each slide. So you'll notice now if you look at it again, everything fits perfectly, but you'll notice nothing happens. See, I'm clicking, nothing's going to happen. And that is because we haven't given the buttons functionality. So let's do that right now. This is going to be the main part. This is going to be the biggest chunk of code. So we need to say, okay, the see next button, which is the button that you press to see the next image, which is the right arrow image, which is this. When this button is pressed here, what do we want it to do? We want it to click. When it's clicked, run a function, and that function will do this. So we say if the slide number is fewer than 6, which means that if this button has been clicked less than 6 times, which will mean there's no more slides to be displayed. So I'll explain that better now. So after the button has been pressed, we want to say slide number plus plus, which just means add 1 to the slide number value. And you can see up here we've set it to 0. So every time we press the button, we want it to add 1. And that's basically telling us that, okay, how far across we are in the slider. So once we get to 6, that means there's no more images to be displayed. It'll start to make sense in a second. So I'll just write a little bit more and then you can see what's going on. So inside of this if statement, we want to also say, if the slide number equals 6, remember 2 equals signs, then the see next button, which is the button that we press to see the next image, the right arrow image, animate, can't type, and do opacity 0, which means that once that we've reached the maximum slide, hide the arrow that allows to go 1 further. So hide this arrow when all the images have been shown. This arrow will no longer be displayed because obviously there's no more images. But then we also want to say else. So if it's not on 6 yet, so if there is more images to be displayed, make sure that the opacity is set to 1 so that we can still see it, so that the user can click next. But also we want to say if the slide number equals 0, but obviously we don't want to see the previous button, because if there's no more images this way, then why is this button required? So we say, okay, the see previous button dot animate. So let's copy this over. Then set the opacity to 0, and then else. So if the slide number is not 0, that means we can still go back. So we want to set the opacity to 1 so that the user can still press the back button to see the previous images. And now there's just one more small thing. So we say variable, a new variable, item width, which is obviously just the width of each individual slide item. So say item dot width is now a variable. And then also make a new variable called pixels move. And then move this over to match up. Pixels moved will tell the buttons, okay, where are we up to? How many images have been shown? How many images are left? So we want to say item width times the slide number, because that then says, okay, if an item is 200 pixels and we're on slide number 4, when we press the next arrow, we need to add 200 pixels, and that'll then move the slider along. And you'll see for yourself later why this works. I can't really explain it too well, but you'll see for yourself. And now that that's set up, we want to say long container dot animate also, because we want the container to animate the slides across. So open and close this here and go down a couple of lines, then close this off. And then also say margin left, which is how it's weird how you have to say it when you do it in jQuery, but oh well. And then say minus pixels moved, and then don't have to put a semicolon. And then now if you look at it, it will go across, see? And then when we get to the end, it'll disappear. But the problem is it doesn't go back yet. The back button doesn't work, which is a big issue for us because obviously you want to go back. So now all we need to do is basically copy this code. So where do we start? So we start here, copy this up, go down a couple of lines there to separate it, and then change see next to see previous. So when the previous button is clicked to go back an image, we want to make sure that the slide number is greater than 0 and then -1 every time. So that -1 image means go back 1 image on the slide number. If the slide number actually equals 0, then the see previous button needs to be hidden, because obviously you can't go back anymore if we're on image, if we're at the very start of our slider. But if it's not on 0, which means there are still images to be gone back to, then we want it to be visible so that the user can do this. And I say if the slide number is equal to 6, so if it's the maximum number of images, then of course we don't want the next button to be shown. So say see next, animate opacity 0, and then copy that down. See next, opacity 1 for all the times when we're not on image 6, where there's still images to go forward. Everything else is the same. So now if we look at it, you refresh, we can go this way, we can go that way, and see how it disappears. This button disappears when there aren't any images to go back to, but this one's still visible. And we click it, and this one comes back, and we can go next all the way to the end, and you'll know the last image, it's the crazy looking bird, and then see, it disappears, and then we go back one, and then this comes back again. So it's a fully functioning image slider for your images, and that's just using CSS, jQuery, and HTML. And of course, you can add some little stylistic, cool looking things. So you can say on the main container, give it a box shadow of 0 pixels, 0 pixels, 4 pixels, black, and then give it a border radius of 5 pixels. And that's the kind of generic looking slider. That's exactly what I showed you to begin with. So if we go back and I'll show you. This is what I created to show you in the intro, and this is what we've just created now. and it's no different whatsoever. So that's it. Thanks a lot for watching this video. It really does mean a lot. If you'd like this video, leave a comment and subscribe if you're into this kind of content. I also make some speed coding videos, which I'll try and link to on the screen right now. Please do stay with me on my progression through YouTube. I feel like I'm getting a little bit better with these videos, and it only will over time. Please leave me some feedback in the comments section. I do read all the comments and reply to everyone that requires a reply. Thanks a lot for watching this video, and I hope to see you back here on this channel again for the next one.